Have you ever wondered where water comes from? Whether it's filling up a glass of water for drinking, taking a shower, irrigating your lawn, or maybe even for the firefighters being able to connect to a hydrant. There's a lot of work and planning that goes into being able to turn on the tap and have water come out. Not only does the city have to provide water for today, they have to be able to support growth for tomorrow. Today we're going to take a look at the reasons that you can turn on your faucet and water comes out of the tap. Here to explain the different ways the city of Sioux Falls gets its water is Ted Lewis, one of the engineers at the city of Sioux Falls.
My emphasis with the engineering department for the city of Sioux Falls is on the water supply to the city. One of the greatest challenges is understanding our water resources and planning to bring those sources of water to the city itself and build all the infrastructure needed to do that. In 2012, the city added the Lewis and Clark Rural Water System, but planning for that began back in the 1990s. The first foundational water source for the city was initially the surface water from the Big Sioux River. And that surface water is still utilized as a source today, and it's treated at the water purification plant. Groundwater started being utilized around 1910, and well fields have been developed and expanded ever since. Today we have more than 50 wells. All of these wells tap into an aquifer, which is a natural underground reservoir for water. This aquifer is under the Big Sioux River and the Skunk Creek. Understanding the science of the aquifer has been increasingly important as we serve more residents and businesses. Because the aquifer is a shared natural resource, we need to be good stewards for the continued growth of the city. Here to help us better understand this science of the aquifer is Bill Eldridge from the United States Geological Survey.
All right, so I'm Bill Eldridge. I work for the U.S. Geological Survey at the Dakota Water Science Center. And what the U.S. Geological Survey does is we provide science for the nation, unbiased science for the nation. And we have several areas that we look at. Perhaps the most famous one is the work we do with earthquakes and with volcanoes. But we also have other divisions that look at mineral resources, including water resources. And that's the division that I work for. And a couple years back, we started a partnership for scientific investigation into the Big Sioux Aquifer with the city of Sioux Falls. And so Sioux Falls is a growing city, one of the fastest growing cities in South Dakota. And as a result, they need to increase their water supply. And they turned to the U.S. Geological Survey, our offices here in the Dakotas, and asked for a little bit of help in learning more about the aquifer that provides most of the water for the city of Sioux Falls. So the name of that aquifer is the Big Sioux Aquifer. It ranges all across eastern South Dakota, but the part that we're interested in starts about in the city of Sioux Falls and goes up to about Del Rapids. And specifically, once we've learned a lot about that larger aquifer, we're honing in on areas that might be good candidates for wells that contribute to the city's water supply. And that's where we're standing right here today, just north of Sioux Falls, right next to Renner's Corner. And we're looking at a city-owned property, and we're going to measure the aquifer properties of the Big Sioux in this property and pass that information on to engineers who then can use it to design a well field that will contribute additional water supplies to the city of Sioux Falls. I mentioned earlier about the Big Sioux Aquifer, so what is an aquifer? Well, an aquifer is a geologic formation or a group of formations or part of a formation that contains sufficient saturated material. That material is soaked in water, and that material also is permeable, so it allows water to move through it. And that those two characteristics need to be sufficient so that we can pull sustainable quantities of water to supply wells or springs. So that's a very long definition of an aquifer, which really just means, hey, it's rocks and sands and gravel that contain water that we can put a well into and draw that water from the groundwater. And so basically the Big Sioux Aquifer was left here by glaciers tens of thousands of years ago. These glaciers would pick up material as they moved into South Dakota, and then as they melted and moved out of South Dakota, they would deposit a lot of the material that they picked up. In the meantime, they're also carving the rock beneath them. So sitting underneath this aquifer is a really hard rock, Sioux quartzite. And if you go to the falls in Sioux Falls, you'll see that rock. It's very, very hard. Well, over top of that, glaciers have deposited the Big Sioux Aquifer, which is composed of a lot of sands and gravels and actually cobble-sized material too. what surprised me was just how sandy and how gravelly that material was. We're basically standing on 30 feet of beach sand type material, or even a little bit coarser than beach sand. And when I saw that material, it's very transmissive. Water moves through sandy and gravel material very, very quickly. And we're going to test those portions for those two things. How much water can that aquifer material hold, and how well does that aquifer material move, or how well does that water move through that aquifer material? So our test involves a couple things. One is we establish or find a place for a candidate well, and then we instrument that well itself, as well as a series of observation wells around that well. Then we pump that well for several days. And behind me you see the discharge from that well that we're pumping out of the Big Sioux Aquifer, again just north of Sioux Falls. We do a bunch of engineering and math on that, and then we can determine the permeability as well as the conductivity of the aquifer. The U.S. Geological Survey, the Dakota Water Science Center, has been partnered with the city of Sioux Falls for several years now. We started back in about 2016 where the city partnered with us to characterize the Big Sioux Aquifer from about the city of Sioux Falls on up to Del Rapids. And that characterization, what we did is we used a geophysical technique called airborne electromagnetic surveying. And what that technique requires is a helicopter with a big probe on it, and that probe measures electrical conductivity of the aquifer material. And based on how that material, the electrical conductivity of that material, we can correlate that with information, say, from a previous study, and correlate the electrical resistivity to how conductive to water that material is. So that was the first step of our study. Let's figure out how big this aquifer is, potentially how deep it is, and then once we have those boundaries, we can take that information from that survey and put it into a groundwater flow model. Now what a groundwater flow model does is it allows us to simulate various scenarios with an aquifer. We can pump water from it, we can add more precipitation to it, we could simulate a drought period, we could see the effect of rivers and streams that are near the aquifer. And what the groundwater flow model does is for every little model cell that we cut that aquifer into, it will calculate a water level based on all those things I talked about before. So we took the data from the Airborne Electromagnetic Survey, we took data from the records that the city maintains as well as the state maintains, put that into a model, and then after we calibrated the model, we could use it then for various pumping scenarios. So the city would ask us, what if we put a well in this location and we pumped it at this level? What would happen to the water levels around that well? And what would happen to our overall volume of water supply in the aquifer? And they're going to use that data to determine how much that well would be capable of pumping, where the best location for that well would be, how deep of a well to drill or to design, as well as the size of the pump that's put into the well. And that size of the pump will also affect the electrical load that's required. And that electrical load will affect where we put utilities, as well as where we're going to route piping from the well to get it into the city water supply. So we're kind of the tip of the iceberg, you will say, of the design. And again, local engineering firms have taken that on, that are partnering with the city, and we're working with them too to make sure that we get those engineering firms all the data that they need to be able to put that design together.
We are now here at the water purification plant located on North Minnesota Avenue out by the airport. This is where we bring all of the water that we treat for the city of Sioux Falls, except for what we purchase from the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System, and we treat all of that water here at this facility. So now we're looking at one of the basins in this facility. Water flows in through the bottom of the basin, through the arms, comes up through the actual basin. We add lime to the water, precipitates the calcium and magnesium that's in the water, or the hardness, precipitates it as a solid. There are two forces that act in that basin, the water flowing up and the particles that are trying to settle to the bottom. And so you have like a floating blanket within that basin, and that's where that treatment occurs. So when you add lime to the basin, it precipitates the calcium and magnesium, you get the cleaner water that comes out the top. over the weirs. The next process we go into is recarbonation, where we add carbon dioxide to reduce the pH slightly. Then from recarbonation we go on to filtration, where we add where we filter the water to take out any of the remaining particles that are in the water. The treatment plant itself was built in 1954 for a capacity of 26 million gallons per day. We doubled the capacity in the 1970s up to about 54 million gallons per day, and then in 2012 we added additional filtration to bring the total capacity up to approximately 75 million gallons per day. Wintertime is when we use the least amount of water. We will treat about 16 to 17 million gallons per day. An average day, we treat about 18 million gallons per day. In the summertime, when people are watering their lawns, we tend to treat the most water, which can be upwards of 40 to 45 million gallons per day. After filtration, we add chlorine to the water, kill the bacteria and the viruses. We have storage on site. We have 9 million gallons of water, both in our underground clear well and in the big blue tank that is the most visible that you can actually see as you come out to the facility. From there then, we pump the water out into the distribution system through the pipes and out into the community to the storage reservoirs and the above ground water towers.
The City of Sioux Falls has a full team of engineers, water purification staff, water maintenance personnel, lab staff, and chemists, making sure that your water is safe, clean, and readily available.